Welcome to Breakaway, the minor hockey podcast brought to you by the OMHA. I'm Aaron Wilbur, your host and founder of the Coaches site. And as always, with me is Ian Taylor, the executive director of the OMHA. Ian, how you doing?
I'm great, Aaron. Great to see you. I know you're battling here, so good job.
Yeah, I'm coming. Well, you know what? It's playoff season, right? And you got to suck it up during the playoffs. you gotta come to play. So that's my mindset, anyways. And if for some reason it sounds like I'm gargling sand, it's I'm coming off about a strep throat, so the vocal cords aren't up to par at the moment.
So
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet, man. So what about update on the? Is it Squamish? I always get mixed up with where you are.
Yeah, Squamish.
Yeah. So
Squamish.
So how is the Squamish U6 hockey program going?
You know what? It was great. So we had a jamboree. So for most of our kids, it was the first sort of games they played, and we hosted a couple of other associations, and we had games going at each end of the rink. We had the benches. We had 10-minute breaks in between the games, just so we could cycle in another goaltender. Yeah. So all the kids could have a turn, and so it was literally we had the granola bars and gummy snacks on the bench. Games were 24 minutes. And we have an old barn that's, I don't know, it maybe sits like 300 people, and it was jammed.
Nice.
Like with the parents and the grandparents and everybody else. So great atmosphere. Although the one downside, pardon me, after all this, so the kids are like pumped full of snacks, and then we have our year-end party afterwards. And it's also one of our kids' birthdays. So there's, pizza, chips, cake, all the, the goodies. And then so this is on a Saturday. On the Sunday, we go skiing, and our little guy's in ski school. So we got to get up early and drive him up to Whistler. And we're literally like 2 minutes outside of the village, and he starts complaining that his tummy's upset. and we're like, oh, it's just, long car ride, whatever. And then 2 minutes out, he just pukes all over himself. And so we had to turn around and do him back. But it was clearly a byproduct of went a little too hard at the U6 jamboree.
Okay, so you like between eating all those pizza and the treats and going to Whistler, you kind of lost me. I'm not gonna lie. But then you brought it back around. Yeah, okay. It didn't sound too tough up to that point, but then okay, I hear you.
Yeah. So we had the big. So at any rate, it was good. It was a really cool. You know what? It's funny. I would say this. I think just because we're new to the community, you can just see how sports, that's where you build your friendships, right? And you can just see where for us moving forward, like these families, and I'll talk to my wife. I'm like, we're going to be with these families for the next, I don't know, 8 to 10 years, probably, together. So it's a great way to obviously kind of get acclimated to a community and make some new pals. But
and the kids obviously had a blast, right? I mean, it sounds like it was well organized. You guys,
Yeah, you know what? They did have a blast, and it's great to go through it. And I think as an adult in that experience, if you just stop and step back and you watch and you listen to the kids, the things that matter to them,
right?
So my kid's wondering, because he goes to if he sees the NHL games, every NHL team has a mascot, and he's fascinated by mascots. So to him, he's like, well, obviously we're playing games, so we'll have a mascot there. So we had to talk about that. And but yeah, he brought his, we had the little Tim Hortons medal and stuff like that. Yeah. He brought it to show and tell at daycare. And my point is, it's all those little details, the stuff that mattered to the kids, was just that through their eyes, this was a big league experience. Yeah. And it was just really cool. But I think just a really good reminder that for kids, they're not thinking beyond what's right in front of them. They're just they're just there to enjoy it.
It's hilarious. It's you know what, you just took me right back to when my younger guy Aiden, when he was young, and our older guy Brendan was playing junior hockey, and so he was fascinated by who has the bus, who's got the bus, because it was what team was traveling. Oh, yeah. So it was, driving up to the rink, there's the bus, and it was, if it had all the stuff wrapped, So it's, who got
do the logo and stuff.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So who's got the bus? So that was his, like, you got mascots, he's got buses,
Yeah, totally.
It's amazing.
Totally. But it is, but you know what? All this stuff draws us in, but a bit of a segue to today's conversation. Yeah. So speaking of that pageantry and all that, we had just gotten the Disney Channel, or the Disney streaming service, right?
Disney Plus, sure.
Disney Plus, yeah, exactly. And so we're flipping through that, and my little guy says, "Stop! What's that?" And it's Mighty Ducks.
Yeah.
And I can remember, so Mighty Ducks came out, I think, when I was like 10 or 11 years old. And I'm trying to think, like, is this a good, like, he's 4, is this a good movie for him? And so anyways, we turn on the Mighty Ducks. Well, he gets sucked in. Like, he thinks it's just awesome. Like, he's talking about he's out in the driveway trying to do a knuckle puck.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Yeah, all this. But it's just amazing with, we're going to be talking with Glenn Andreessen, the executive director of Minnesota Hockey today, and obviously the Mighty Ducks is based off a team in Minnesota.
Yeah, sure.
And specifically today, we want to chat with them because they're having an explosion of growth with their membership, and particularly focusing on female hockey, the BIPOC community, and recruiting new kids and families to come play. But I'm watching the Mighty Ducks as an adult for the first time, and I'm like, this is brilliant. No wonder this helped kind of the explosion of growth in the U.S. into maybe non-traditional markets, or even families getting involved in hockey, because they kind of touch on everything and they make the game look so fun.
Yeah.
And you could just see as a a little kid, you'd be like, yeah, I want to do what these guys are doing. This looks awesome.
Yeah. Amazing. It's hilarious. So I don't know if you got through all of those Mighty Ducks movies, but there's also, I guess there's a show now too, which again, I guess it would, well, he's 19 now. It would have been 18 when he came out. It was during COVID. We crushed all those too. So,
yeah.
So you never get away from it. Believe me. Yeah.
No, it's really cool, but it's great to, I think particularly with what I do now, just to, see the game through my son's eyes, and
right.
What a cool experience is, and how excited he gets to go to the rink, and his hockey, making, his friendships that he's making through hockey, and all of that is, it's pretty cool. And I think it just sort of grounds you a little bit, in terms of, what the important stuff is.
Oh no, for sure.
And that's retention. And you just realize, like, it's the fun aspect is so important, both in terms of retention, but I also argue it's important in terms of, helping kids reach their potential. And for some kids, that means playing the game at a really, really high level. But it all comes back to, do they love it enough that they're going to put the work into, realize their full potential?
For sure. I mean, Minnesota hockey, as we keep a really close eye on everything those guys do. And they're a hockey state, and they're similar to the OMHA in many ways in terms of, again, it's size, rural, urban, and hockey being, key part of their communities, as you're talking about. So what they're doing here, I mean, is incredible. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation, maybe more so than anything, so I can steal some ideas. But yeah, what they're doing here to grow the game, and that's number one on everyone's strategic plan right now. I can tell you, from Hockey Canada to the OHF to the OMHA and to the local minor hockey association, and they're doing that. So I mean, that's brilliant. And then Aaron, as you touched on, the retention part of it, keeping them, and then letting everyone find their water level, right? They'll find where they fit, whether it's on desire, how much they want to play, or whether it's on, skill level, at what level they want to play. But I think for us, it's hockey is sport for life, hopefully, right? And they'll be playing it long after they leave minor hockey. But also, like you, they're the coaches of tomorrow, right? They're the coaches and the community leaders of the next group. So I think that's something, volunteerism is difficult these days, and it's harder to get volunteers. People have high expectations. So that's the other part. So we want to make sure we have those people for tomorrow too. So, this is really cool. So like I said, I'm if nothing else, I'm a good thief. So I'm looking forward to some stuff to steal here.
No, I think you're going to come up with a lot. And what's really interesting for me about this conversation is it feels like forever ago, but I believe it was spring of 2020. I believe it was in June. I had you and Glen on my podcast,
absolutely,
blasting out. And I mean, our producer Justin would have to verify it. I know up until this season, it was our most popular, most downloaded episode of all time. And it was great, but it was really interesting to hear you two go back and forth because, as you said, very similar cases in terms of urban, rural membership, the sort of the size of the membership. So, and how what fascinated me is that understanding that in your role, every decision that you make, and this is I don't want to speak for you. This is just my observation. It would appear to me that every decision you make, whether you're Ian Taylor or Glenn Andreessen, through conversations I've had with him, you're making some people really happy and you're pissing a lot of people off. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Every decision you make, and you have to, and so I would imagine what I find so interesting is you kind of have to make those decisions knowing that there's going to be people that are going to be upset and there's going to be some noise that's created, but you got to sort of block that out and say, I'm not going to be influenced by that. I can only make what I can gather all the information and make the best decision that most positively affects, the group versus one particular segment of that population. Yeah. And that's got to be challenging. It does not lost to me. That's not an easy chair to sit in.
Yeah. You know what? I think you've captured it really well. And that's our challenge going forward. Right. And I think the other thing we've learned is, one, it's like you say, have as much of that information as possible. And I perhaps one of the biggest lessons we've learned over, and it's been, pre-COVID, but certainly through COVID and now coming back, is we need that information from the ground floor. And by that, I mean, I always talk about it where rubber hits the road, and that's at the association level. So engagement with our associations and our membership is really important. And so that's, that brings you back to the whole, do you think or do you know analogy, right? So we've all got our ideas, but how do we confirm or not, whatever we're thinking there. So it's ongoing, it's ongoing, but I think more than ever, there's a collective approach. And I think, that's our challenge, is continuing to engage. So we understand, and ultimately, just like your jamboree on the weekend there, that's where rubber hits the road. Like, that's where it all this stuff that we do and talk about, that's where it lands for, your little guy and a bunch of families, right? That's their experience. So let's try and make that the best one we can, right? So, and it sounds like it was pretty good for you.
Yeah, no, it was, and it's we're looking at, just through families, we got, we're in a position, I'm assuming like a lot of smaller communities where we have to go and recruit families because they do have a lot of choices, but it's like, hey, we got to make sure that when our kids get to say U11, that we have a big enough pool of kids to form a team. And I think that's the one thing that just having, having been involved with Minnesota hockey for a number of years now, is they're not focused on just the elite. Like their strategy is very much, if we can get the largest collection of players, that means we're going to get the largest collection of talent. And then if we can just nurture them long term and keep as many kids, like we don't want to separate them too young, from elite competitive to non-elite,
right,
house, whatever. They just try and keep that pool together as long as they can, because they know some kids are going to take a little bit longer to develop. And the result is in North America, and I know as much as I say it's not about elite hockey, they've got the recipe figured out where that approach ultimately leads to more players playing in the National Hockey League and playing competitively at the highest levels. And it's not even close. Like Minnesota puts more players in the NHL than anywhere in North America.
That's amazing.
By a large percentage. But again, it all starts at the grassroots level. Let's get as many kids playing as possible. Let's give all these kids an equal opportunity to fully bake and figure out, not when they're, 7 and 8, when they're, 13, 14, 15, who has that potential and who can realize it. And it works. It works. So
you know what, Aaron, and I know we want to go to Glen. So, but just before we do, just that point, if I can just seize on that point you just made, it sounds, I'm really conscious of us talking about, theory, right? And I've talked about this with you before, the theory, is all good, but can you, what's the practical implementation look like? Can you actually apply it? Or is it just pie in the sky stuff? And sometimes I think, I think people think, and sometimes I think we get stuck in that, that theory but what you've just talked about is again, meshing the two of them is the truth is keeping as many kids involved for as long as possible and having the best experience possible wherever they go. It allows for that, that larger pool, more people involved in our sport. And ultimately, like you say, part of that is you'll have, you'll develop those higher end players just by just the numbers, right? Like just purely the math tells us we'll have that, right?
100%. Yeah.
So, but it's real what we're talking about. It's not like, it's like, that's what's important for me to get across is that's one of my new things is like, can it be, can we implement this? Is it real? Like, or is it just theory?
Well, no. And I think that, fortunately in the day and age we live in today, we have data, right? And
that's it.
And again, this isn't, it's not us looking at, Minnesota and saying, we think this is the best place or this model works. We know it is. So it's, it's fascinating. And I think, just to close here, I think the one thing that will, I go down to Minnesota about once a year and, we work with, associations down there. But the one thing that stands out to me is they take so much pride in it's community driven. Like kids there grow up and that logo on the front of their jersey, that means everything. Like the competition between the small towns, like the thought of representing, a team that's not rooted in their community just is so foreign to them. To them, it's all about, if I'm from this town, I'm not going to go to somewhere else to play because I think it's better. I'm going to be here because this is, my goal is to eventually play on my high school team and represent them, try and get them to the state tournament. And again, that sense of community is so important, which is, I think it's really important to our game that, that's one thing that we have to try and keep intact, because I know growing up in Canada myself, like that's what I grew up with. Like I grew up in Kamloops, right? And when we played Kelowna, that meant something. Yeah. And I worry sometimes that we're letting go of that when I think we've got to try and keep that in place. But there's going to be lots to talk about. I can already tell this is going to be a fascinating conversation, and we will be right back with Glenn Andreessen, Executive Director of Minnesota Hockey. The Coaches site is a proud partner of the OMHA, along with many of the top development organizations in the world. The Coaches site was created to provide hockey's top coaches, leaders, and performance experts with a platform to share their experience and insights with amateur coaches and minor hockey organizations, with the goal of enhancing the development opportunity for all players. A membership includes access to 500 hours of educational videos, a library of over 700 drills, articles breaking down the latest tactics and systems, and our newly released Initiation Skills Series, which provides a video-based development curriculum for the first 3 years of a player's minor hockey career. Regardless of the level you coach, the Coaches site is going to provide you the ultimate coaching toolkit. Listeners of the Breakaway podcast can save 25% off an annual membership by using the code OMHA when they register. Again, use the code OMHA and get registered today. We're back with Glenn Andreessen, Executive Director of Minnesota Hockey. Glenn, great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Aaron. Great to be here.
So guys, listen, I got a question for both of you to kick this off. So, in like professional sports leagues, when two teams meet in the final, that generally like the mayors of the respective cities will have a friendly wager of something that's kind of unique to their communities. So hypothetically, let's imagine that the Toronto Maple Leafs and Minnesota Wild meet in this year's Stanley Cup finals, and you guys kind of being the mayors of hockey in your respective regions, what would be the wager that you might make with each other? What would you offer up?
So only Minnesota people would understand this, but I would make Ian for a full year have to refer to hockey pants as breezers.
I knew it.
I like it.
You know what? And I would say that's exactly what I was going to say. I knew you were going to bring up breezers. I love it. Have you heard that, Aaron, before?
You know what? I heard it from Mike Snee, who Glenn replaced at Minnesota Hockey. But I remember him bringing up breezers. Like we were in a conversation. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? What's a breezer? He's like, then it was like a 30-minute soapbox rant on.
We had a family from Minnesota play. Their son played with my younger guy, and this is probably 10 years ago now. And yeah, they brought up breezers, and everyone was just fascinated by what are breezers. But then we adopted the language. So yeah, I'll take that bet, and I'll hope for Minnesota to win.
And what are you gonna put up? What do you mean?
I'm saying I'm accepting that. I'm
you're accepting it.
Oh yeah. Oh, you want me to put something up? I don't have. You know what? We don't have something as territorial. Someone will slap my hand for missing something here, but I don't honestly. I don't know.
Maybe like a case of steam whistle.
Well, sure. I mean, that goes without saying. Sure, no problem.
Yeah. I'll take it.
Breezers.
I've never had that.
Breezers. I'll go for that. I just want that to become common language.
Oh man, it's no. There's a different dialect down there when it comes to hockey.
I love it,
which is awesome. So hey, Glenn. So big news this year. So Minnesota Hockey surpasses 19,000 players at the U8 level. And so that's in 2023. But back in 2016, a big deal was made that you guys surpassed 17,000. And, so that growth, particularly when, COVID is kind of placed in between those two dates or those two milestones, with the benefit of hindsight, I guess, how do you look back and what do you attribute the growth to?
Well, there's a lot of ways I can answer that question. I mean, I do think we have implemented some programs aimed towards growth in a lot of areas of the country and North America have done similar programs. The first one, and I just can't stress enough how big this program has been, but the Little Wild Learn to Play program, which I think started, we were one of the first markets to start. I think it started in LA, and then we jumped on right after. And basically that was working with the Wild to establish, a 4-week learn to play program for kids age 5 to 8. Started out at 8 locations throughout the state, and it's grown to 20. And that, we're pretty rigid in that you can't do that program if you've ever played organized hockey. So if you think of, 60 to 65 kids per location, that's a couple thousand kids that are trying hockey for the first time, and they're doing it for more than a day. Try hockey for free days are great, but they get 4 sessions, full gear, that including skates that fits well. It's fitted for them, so I think that's a big piece too. So there, without a doubt, that program has been a huge success for us, and we do some other programs as well. Like a Gear Up Minnesota program where we work with Dick's Sporting Goods to provide starter gear to all their first year players. So, but I think 10 years ago we kind of came to the realization that as our numbers were kind of stagnant at that 8 and under level, it was less about like, hey, we're the state of hockey and people love hockey in Minnesota, so people are just going to come. And we kind of came to that realization, like, no, we got to actively get out there and attract these families, especially those families that have never, mom and dad didn't play hockey and they're completely new to the sport. And how do we attract those? And so there's been more of an emphasis on that. And one of the greatest strengths we have is also a challenge in that each of our 140 some associations are completely volunteer driven. So each one has a grow the game recruiter, coordinator, whatever. And when you have a volunteer, you could have someone who's really dedicated to that for 5 or 6 years, or someone who doesn't spend as much time on it because they have all these other things going on in their life. So we try to get in front of those people as much as possible and really work with them to try and get more kids into the sport, get more kids into the game. And I'll wrap this answer up quickly because I know I'm going on. But I also think being in Minnesota and having these low barriers to entry, meaning low cost and lower time commitment, is a big help to us as well.
Yeah. So you know what, Glenn, it's so interesting. That was a brilliant answer because you hit on 5 or 6 different things, and they all, I think they're things we're all talking about, but to Minnesota hockey's credit, your credit, you guys are actually doing it. I mean, I think that, again, the realization that it's that you're the state of hockey. We're we're in Ontario. Where you think it's automatic, and that's what we're talking about. It's not automatic that the weather turns and people play hockey anymore. It's a competitive marketplace, and there's no shortage of things to do. So I the fact that you guys are actually actioning this, I think we've reached a point where we're aware of it, but I think there is sometimes some expectation that you'll just open your sandwich board, put it on the sidewalk, and people will walk in, and it's just not the case. I mean, there's the people that want to play, and that, they'll be there, but it's that next group, which is, credit to you guys. So that's more of a comment than the question. When you get to, I mean, we do have a similar program with the First Shift program up here with, again, 6-week program. As you say, it's more than one day, low financial commitments, 6-week program, low time commitment. So again, you get introduced to the game. Introduced to the game versus learn to play, right? But how do you transition from one to the other? That's where our challenge is, and in different places we're seeing some really good, I guess, transition rates or adoption rates where people are now signing up for, regular hockey, for a full season of hockey. How are you managing that process?
Yeah, so I think it's just little things like we've made what I thought were just common sense decisions when it came to like the Little Wild program. Like we started in September. Not everywhere that has a learn to play program does that, but for us that leads right into October and November when our associations start up. And then we work really closely with the Wild and USA Hockey to every registered kid, where do they registered for Little Wild, where do they live, and then we get we compile all those kids together, send that out to each association to say, hey, these kids are doing Little Wild. Please make sure you follow up with them so they know where to go, because a lot of them don't. And we hope, and not everywhere is like this, but we hope most of our associations kind of ease them in still. So they've had 4 sessions a Little Wild, but they still might not be ready to just take off with kids who've been playing for 3 or 4 years. So have another kind of rookie camp or learn to play camp. And some of our associations, a lot of them do a great job of that. They don't just throw kids into the fire, they ease them in. So I think that's important. And Ian, just one more point on kind of those non-traditional families, or those families that are new to it. I've talked to people that have moved into the state of Minnesota that didn't have a hockey background, and of course, it being my job, I'm saying, hey, have you thought about trying hockey? And you realize that a big thing that I have to do too is break down those perceptions of hockey, because in their mind it's well, isn't that mean like I have to get my kid to practice at 6 a.m. before school, and doesn't it mean I have to travel 3 hours to a game, or get on a plane to go to a game? And it's kind of like, wow, that, like, even in like TV commercials here in the States, like they'll show like, oh, selling a car, and mom and dad throw all this equipment in the car to get their kid while he's still sleeping in the back seat because it's so early. It's like, that's not the case. Like, no, I've never taken my kid to a practice before school. On the rare occasion, I'll have an 8 a.m. game on a Saturday that I'll bring my kid to. So some of that too is, what we have to do is break down those perceptions of hockey, that it's this crazy thing, when no, it's actually it can be a pretty sane thing.
What you're saying there, Glenn, is I think of the, water cooler talk at the office, or and you say, and we have that exact conversation. The one parent's like, oh yeah, we were away for 4 days, and we just got back late last night from, wherever. And that other parent who hasn't had their son or daughter in the game, they're being, oh wow, like, is this, like, are we going to step into this world, and is that going to be the expectation? We have that exact conversation with our group of just that it's perception is reality, right? So that person hears it, they think that's what I'm in for. I'm in for every weekend traveling 25-week season, so we do have to overcome that.
Exactly. And I use, and it's not just hockey either. I use the dance dad analogy all the time. So bear with me here, but you talk about water cooler talk, and I've got 2 daughters, and, at the office at the water cooler, you'll hear a dad talk about, and I'm not slamming dance in any way. I think it's a great activity. Yeah. If, whoever wants to do it, it's great for kids. But I hear dads at the water cooler saying, gosh, you should see the amount of money I spend on these dance uniforms and the amount of makeup that my daughter wears. And when I go to the recital, she's the first group going on, but they don't let you leave for the whole 4-hour session. I got to sit and watch all these. And so in my head, I'm like, I hope my girl doesn't want to do dance, And so I think that's the same way with hockey, like the things you just said. Well, we traveled all this way and we didn't get back, we missed 3 days of school this week.
Yeah.
And we're putting our kid in this hockey academy that's $15,000 a year. So if I'm a new parent, or, a parent that's new to hockey, am I going, is that what I really want to sign up for?
Right. Totally.
So that's part of the thing here that, I kind of consider my job is to try to knock down those perceptions, or make people realize you don't have to do all that stuff to have a great hockey experience.
Correct.
Or to have success in hockey.
Yeah. Right.
Well, Glenn, what I think is so interesting is that it seems like it's intentional on your part to, remove as much friction as possible to attract more families and more young players to the game. And frankly, I think just looking at how hockey is administered in other parts of North America, like almost a complete 180, where I think a lot of associations like, hey, you should play for us because we're going to Nashville for a tournament, or we get, and they try and sell that pageantry. And what you're, I think, suggesting, and I mean, I think what's so unique too is you guys have the data to back it up, because not that it's all about the elite players, but certainly the numbers speak for themselves. The state of Minnesota puts more players in the NHL than anywhere else in North America, period. It's not even close. But taking a very different approach and trying to widen the base of that pyramid as much as possible. And over time, obviously, if you get enough good athletes in the pool, some of them are going to, turn into something special.
Well, exactly. And so I'll preface what I'm about to say in saying that I truly care just as much about the worst 13-year-old player in our state as I do about the best player in our state. Okay, so I'll say that first. But it does help our argument when we do have the most Minnesotans in the NHL, more Minnesotans in the NHL than any other state, and we're continually surpassing our previous highs every year, and the most Division I men and the most Division I women, and the U.S. Women's Championship roster, not their roster, but their tryout camp was announced, and of the 46 players, 12 of them are from Minnesota. So that's not the most important thing for us, but again, it really helps us show that, hey, this model that we have here, not only is it cute and fun and you play with your friends and you play for your community and all that, like, touchy-feely stuff, like it also works. And these men and women are proof of that. So you can say, like, that's, community hockey is great if you're playing rec hockey. But I don't want us to be perceived as rec hockey because A, we're not, and B, if that's perception, then that stuff that we're talking about that keeps people away from hockey, that stuff becomes more prevalent. And so I could, and I hate being anecdotal and pointing to one kid, but when I point at the most recent guy from Minnesota who played, who made his NHL debut was Wyatt Kaiser with the Blackhawks.
Yeah.
And that kid he wore an Andover jersey from the time he was 5 years old up until he was 18 years old. And then he played a few years of college up in Duluth, Minnesota, and now he's in the NHL. And he's just one of 63 players in the NHL from Minnesota and almost all of them have done a very similar route to that. So it worked for him, and it can work for every player, I believe. And I don't think I don't think there needs to be alternatives. I think we need to keep improving what we have, but this model does work. And again, and I don't take any credit for that.
I guess you're more like the gatekeeper trying to keep it intact for as long as possible.
And I'm more like I'm trying to be the mouthpiece for it.
Yeah.
Because this was established so long ago, and it's kept on through. And there's been instances of other areas of North America that were that way and have changed, and we've kind of seen what happened, and we don't really want to go through that ourselves. So,
well, one thing, so I was down in Minnesota, you guys put on a development summit, so your local associations could come in. There's a bunch of speakers from USA Hockey, and it was a really cool event. And so just a note on that event, one thing that I thought was really cool is that I think most youth hockey associations, they have, be it at their AGM or other events, where there's a lot of information shared on the administrative side of operating an association, but not a lot of information shared on, like, how are we actually developing the players, providing a better experience, making them better hockey players. And so I thought that was great, that was a very singular focus of that event. But in the conversations with a lot of the high school coaches in attendance, and there seemed to be a real sort of alignment and synergy between like the high school programs and the youth hockey programs, but you'd have these small towns of 10, 15,000 people where, all the youth hockey kids, their goal is to play for their high school. And these coaches would all say, like with a lot of pride, that NHL player played here in this small town. And again, he played till he was 18, and this player played here till he was 18. And I would say, well, in that environment in high school, like what is the gap between the top player, the player that might go on to play Division I hockey and maybe the NHL one day, versus the worst player on the high school team? And they'd be like, oh, it's massive. Like it's a huge gap. I'm thinking, man, everywhere else, the pull is for those players to say, oh no, we're going to get all the best players together from all the small towns and we're going to create a super team. And it just seemed like that's not even a consideration. Like that pull to represent your community is so strong. I remember having that when I grew up playing hockey. I feel like we've lost that in a lot of places. What would you attribute, in Minnesota, being able to keep that top of mind?
That's a great question. So the name that pops into my head is Casey Middlestad.
Yes.
Right. So Casey is a first round pick who's now doing great for the Buffalo Sabres. So Casey played through his senior year of high school, and when he came back, he was far and away the best player in the state. I mean, just an absolutely spectacular player. So he was on a team with, kids who were third, fourth liners, whatever. He had other great players with him too that are playing Division I now, but some kids just were, I don't want to even say average, because if you make your high school team in Eden Prairie, you're a really good player. But they were nowhere in his stratosphere. But I would be willing to bet that a lot of those kids on that third, fourth line were some of Casey's best friends that he grew up playing with all through, his time at Eden Prairie. And so, again, I don't want to speak for him. This could be completely false, but I'm willing to bet he would say, yeah, like not only did I want to keep playing high school hockey, but I wanted to play with them and I wanted to be around them. And I would even say the gap isn't that big, at least in his mind or their mind. They're all on this team that's striving for a state championship, and they're good players. Like there's just a lot of good players in high school hockey. And I'll use Casey as an example because he was the best player in the state. He won the Mr. Hockey Award, put up more points than everyone. Just a spectacular player. But in watching him at the state tournament, teams were keen on him. And, this supposedly weak brand of hockey that outsiders might call it, he couldn't just go in and do whatever he wanted. I mean, they did not win the state championship. He did not put up 4 goals a game because other teams have high school players that are really good too. And they know that they have to shut him down. And I think he probably realized he got better from that because, man, these high school coaches are smart. And so they're going to figure out a way to try to shut this kid down as much as possible. So, again, a long answer to your question, but I would say that, yes, there's a talent gap, but maybe not as big as people would think. And B, like that doesn't necessarily always matter to these kids because they're still going to get great competition and they're still going to be, having the time of their lives with their best friends.
And I want to pass it over to Ian, but I just want to share a story about Casey Middlestad, and this just kind of jogged my memory. And I gave a presentation at the development summit, Glenn. I'm not sure if you would have been in the room. I think you might have been taking your daughters to dance, but so I have this picture, and I use it a lot in talks that I give. And so in 2017, the NHL draft is in Chicago. And we were taking part in this coaching event that happens during the draft with the NHL Coaches Association. And so we do the event, and then I'm with a couple of my staff, and we had free passes to the draft. And they're like, "Oh, like we want to go watch." I'm like, "Guys, like the draft is so boring. Like it's way better on TV. It's really boring being there in person." They said, "Well, we just want to go see it." So we go down to the United Center, and we kind of mosey around the arena, and finally we end up at the nosebleed section. There's a walkway, and so we're just kind of cruising there. We're leaning against the bar watching the draft unfold, and I noticed where we've kind of posted up that there's a group of teenagers and parents, and you can kind of tell. I'm like, I'm like, these guys must be on the same team. And it's a group of parents, group of kids. And so finally I lean over to one of the moms and I'm like, hey, just curious, like, who are you guys here supporting? And they're like, oh, Casey Middlestead. Have you heard of him? And I'm like, oh yeah, like he's like really good player. So you guys are from Minnesota? They're like, yeah. I'm like, so who are all these, kids? And like, oh, this is his entire high school team. I'm like, the entire team? They're like, yeah, we all drove down, like every kid and every parent drove down to support this kid. And I have this picture where Casey gets picked and it's not at the stage. It's like this whole section erupted. And I'm like, man. And the key thing the mom said, she goes, Casey's played with these kids since they were 8 years old. And they're like, our families have been together since our kids were 8 years old for the tournaments, etc. And I just thought, man, like you can't buy that, right? Like that's not for sale. The only way that's created is just, kind of having common values and the sense of community. And that's, it was really neat. I'll try and flip the picture to you.
Yeah. Well, speaking of pictures, so I give presentations on this a lot, and I love sharing pictures of little kids on this outside the glass, looking inside the glass at these high school players that they are just in awe of. And I actually have a picture of two kids with their back to the camera. One says Middlestead on the back of his jersey, and the other says Lieberman. And they're about probably 7 or 8 years old. So one is Casey, and the other one is Nick Lieberman, who's had a great Division I career that just wrapped up with Notre Dame. But that is exactly like what what is so important that isn't measurable, but just that inspiration that those two little kids had watching high school kids play. And then they become these high school stars. And so they're inspiring this next generation of kids, not just in Eden Prairie where they live, but kids that watch them on the state tournament saying, I want to be on my high school team and be the next Casey Middlestead or Nick Lieberman or Noah Cates or whoever the player might be.
Glenn, I just in terms of, your peers influencing you, we've done, as we've talked about, we have, I think we've put together some really good, again, introduce the game programs we've talked about. We've got great learn to play programs, cross ice, half ice, station based. All that good stuff. We've done we've done a good job there for that entry point, but that entry point is for younger kids. So what about the, parents are largely influencing, I'm going to put, I played soccer, so I'm going to put my sons in soccer. I played hockey, I'm going to put them in, or dance, your mom did dance, but what happens to the kid, goes to school, is in grade 3, 10 years old, and hasn't played hockey, but, their friend Aaron says, he's got a hockey jacket or a shirt or whatever. And that kid comes home and now says to his parents, Aaron's playing hockey, I want to play hockey. Right. So it's not coming from the parent. It's coming from the friend or the community, whatever the case may be. And now we want to, that kid wants to join hockey, and you mentioned earlier, we're dropping them in with kids who have played, might have played, I don't know, 4 or 5 years even, and now it's like, well, we'll throw them in the deep end and hope they can tread water, sort of thing. That's a challenge that we have identified, and again, in larger associations, you might be able to tier players, but in smaller ones, you can't. That's a challenge because now they're going into a situation and, maybe not having, some success. They're not treading water, and that's not a great experience for them. So that's one we're having a challenge on. So, we've thrown around this term, first shift, but, second shift, maybe there's a second entry point, but again, what, have you guys dealt with that? Because boy, we could use some help on that one.
Well, people are going to think that I asked you to ask this question.
Oh,
when I give my answer. Okay. But we didn't share questions before this. No. But you were describing something we started addressing. In earnest, I would say 3 or 4 years ago, and we started pre-COVID. We started a camp called the Never Too Late Camp. So second shift might actually be a better name for it, but we call it Never Too Late.
Nice.
So like Little Wild, it is for kids who have never played organized hockey, but the age group for this is age 9 to 13. And we'll take a 14-year-old boy or girl too, but 9 to 13 is kind of the sweet spot. And that we do in the summer, so in July or August at a few different locations. But that is for exactly those kids, because you're exactly right. Like, that's the other perception of hockey is like, I learned about hockey. I see my friends doing it. I didn't want to do it when I was 5, but now I'm 10 and it seems fun. Yeah. And like, I'd like to try that. And so we kind of thought, well, let's do this camp. And I've been blown away at the popularity of it. So there was definitely a market there that makes me realize we should have done this long ago. Yes, so they get 8 sessions of ice time. So yes, if they're a beginner at 11 and they do that camp, they're still going to be way behind other kids that have been playing for 5 or 6 years. But at least they have some basic skills to get along on the ice. They can do well. They're not going to make the top team at their home association. They're more than likely going to be the bottom team. But I don't think they care, or at least the feedback is they don't care about that. We also have a rec league in Minnesota hockey that a lot of those players will go to, where that's same age group, but that's 1 practice a week and 1 game a week for 3 months. So it's very low cost, low time commitment. So that's an option too. But and I'll just say this about that camp, like in my job and in your guys' job, we see the craziness that overcomes hockey and youth sports, because there's a lot of focus on these top kids and just keeping up with the Joneses and whatever. If you want to get that feeling of like, here's why I do this again, and like, here's just seeing the innocence of mites and all that, you see that again at a camp like this, because these 9 to 13-year-olds who are just doing, they're all out there with kids of similar ability, so they're having fun, but B, like, it's just the innocence comes back, because that these kids aren't doing this because like, oh, you know what, I have aspirations to play in the NHL, so I'm going to do this camp and I can. No, it's just like, you know what, hockey seems fun, I want to do it. And then they go out and they do it, and they play on these low teams and they don't care. They have so much fun. And that's the stuff, like, to get all cheesy, but that stuff just kind of warms your heart. When you see that, you kind of forget about the other things in hockey, and you're like, this is why we do what we do, just to get more kids into the sport. And so if you have the ability to set a camp up, like I do think there's a market for that anywhere.
Yeah.
To just say, hey, here's 8 sessions of ice where it's well coached, but it's just the fundamentals of hockey for these older kids. And hopefully once they're done with that camp, there's an easy transition into something to keep them in the sport.
Yeah, it's so, the word I just think of when you explain that is, it's just genuine, right? Like their reaction and their experience is just genuine. And I think, that's all. I mean, if that's what we achieve, man, that's all we can ask for. I think that's brilliant. Sorry, Aaron.
No, I was just going to say, we work with Mike Benelli, who's based out of New York, but he's a USA Hockey coach, course conductor. And he's got a great analogy. He's like, some kids just want to go play on the monkey bars. They don't want to be the fastest at the monkey bars. They just want to do it because they enjoy it. And he's like, the lesson there isn't like, oh, we have to go start like a monkey bar camp or like private elite lessons to learn how to do the monkey bars. We just let the kids just enjoy the monkey bars and see what happens. And kind of use that analogy with hockey. Like sometimes, like, the fact that the kids showed up and they're having fun, we don't need to do anything else. We're good, let's get out of the way.
Yeah.
So, hey, Glenn, can you explain a little bit about the Minnesota model association program, which I believe is, very much in its infancy as a program, and just what the purpose of that was and how you've been able to roll that out across the entire state.
Yeah, we kind of took a page out of the book of USA Hockey. As USA Hockey was implementing the American development model, and the things that were alluded to earlier of more station-based practices and teams sharing ice, and keeping kids moving and things like that. They started recognizing clubs and associations throughout the country that really are adopting all of those principles and putting them into place. And so we kind of developed something similar. As you guys know, Minnesota is a little bit different than the rest of the country, so it was a little harder for our associations to meet those USA Hockey guidelines, just because with ice times being different, and we are publicly owned rinks, so it's a little more difficult to get all those ice times that are required for the USA Hockey model program. But anyway, but we identified kind of Minnesota model benchmarks to hit for player development. Are you doing these things? Do you have this practice to game ratio? Do you have a rookie camp? Do you have all these things at the various age levels? And if you do, then you'll be recognized as a model association program within the state. So we'll send you a banner. We'll give you kind of access for teams to participate in the Wild Mite Jamboree or things like that. So it's just kind of a way to recognize the associations we feel are doing the best at developing players. And a lot of our Minnesota model is directly, I don't want to say stolen, but taken from the USA Hockey American development model too. They're very similar, they're very similar concepts, same thing of station-based practices, small area games, all of those great things.
So Glenn, it's development focused, right? I mean, one of the things we were looking at was, and again, Model Minor Hockey Association, Hockey Canada was going down a similar path, and so one of our discussions was, do we keep it player development focused as you have here, or do we also, are there other elements of a Model Minor Hockey Association, meaning, probably more administrative, like do you have a risk management coordinator and policies and stuff like that? Do you have, for us here, you get into some of the governance stuff, are you incorporated and all that, but you've kept yours development focus, which I think is at all of our hearts, is that's where we would stay. But I wondered if you'd looked at, again, more of the governance side, or more of the kind of, I guess, admin side of, do you have these things in play? You know what I mean? Coach selection, player evaluation, but also some of these other, I guess more stuff that you're dealing with, around conduct and that sort of thing. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, not so much in our model association program. We do ask them to have, a hockey director,
right,
that is in charge of player development. But on the, on the administrative side, I would say, no, we don't. For example, like tryouts for teams, we leave that up to every association how best to do that. Are they closed tryouts? Are they open tryouts? Are they independent evaluators? Do you allow parents in to watch? Do you not allow parents in to watch? And, so I guess maybe we do that because we don't know what the best solutions are for that. So it's like, you guys figure it out on your own. But we also, as a governing body with all these 140 some associations, you also have to put your trust into them on that stuff, that they're doing things the right way. And, I tend to think that they are, which is really remarkable, because again, all these volunteers are doing this. It's not their full-time jobs, and they have almost all of them have kids playing hockey. So they're balancing that. And yet they're still pulling off all the administrative things that you're talking about, the ice scheduling and the, volunteer schedules and the, the fundraising benefit, and all these things are just put on by people who just want their kids and other kids to have a great experience. So no, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it's
but I would
good.
say
No, it's good. I mean, that's just, these things can kind of balloon. So I like how you've kept this focused, and again, it's something we've talked a lot about. And the other thing, Aaron and I kind of touched on this before we brought you on in our kind of preamble, was how much as we're bringing down, what we feel is kind of the latest, greatest, and we're giving tools and support and resources to our associations. Every time we sit down with an association or a group of associations, I find we're taking back almost more than we're giving. Like the stuff they're telling us that they're doing, and ultimately, and I always refer to it as, where rubber hits the road is with them. And it's amazing the stuff you find out that associations are doing. And so it's idea sharing and best practices, but I can tell you, in a lot of cases, we're the ones really taking back the knowledge because of the stuff that's going on. And it's like you say, it's happening organically. It's happening by incredibly giving volunteers. I mean, it's amazing, really. And I'm sure you're seeing similar stuff.
100%. So the conference that Aaron attended in September, the Hockey Director Conference, is one of two conferences. We also do one called the Association Leader Conference in May, which is similar, but that's for all administrators, not just hockey directors. And exactly what you said in that, like, yes, we have presentations and we have little sessions that we talk to these people, but far and away the biggest benefit to it is all these leaders from associations and hockey directors talking to each other about what works best for them and sharing those ideas. It really, and like you said, and we come away with, oh man, like this was really popular, or what this association did is great. We need to make sure we're sharing that with other associations. So those conferences are really the best things. Are those ideas that go between associations. And it's kind of cool because all these, and I don't know if it's like this in other parts of the country where clubs are competing against each other, but these associations are all competing against each other on the ice. Yet you get these leaders in a room and they're all talking about, well, we did this, you should try this, and this will help you become better. And it's like they completely forget that their kids play against each other and we don't like that town over there. And they just talk about, just making the experience better for all the kids. Now they might regret that in, February when the two teams face off, but that is the cool part of doing this and doing it with a bunch of volunteers and communities.
Glenn, one of my biggest takeaways from the hockey director event, and I don't know why this hadn't occurred to me before, but when we were down there, hockey, like in Canada, and I would argue probably most places in the US, were part way or all the way through their tryout. So this is early September, and we were talking with the hockey directors, and they're like, no, we don't start tryouts until October. And I was like, you don't start tryouts till October? And they looked at me like it's the most normal thing. And I'm like, this is so unique. And again, one thing that's very counterintuitive to how hockey is administered in most parts of North America. Just using that as an example, like, has there ever been an argument to move tryouts to earlier in the season or extend the minor hockey season in Minnesota? And if so, like, how do you preserve that? Because clearly it works when, it seems in most parts of the world, we're trying to figure out how to cram more hockey into the season.
Yeah, well, I'll try to keep this brief, but I mean, for a long time in Minnesota, and it's still this way up in northern Minnesota, where a lot of the arenas, they take their ice out in March, and it doesn't go back into the arena until October or September. And so, and like a lot of people think, well, that's crazy. Like, how do the kids get better in northern Minnesota? And I'm like, well, one example is that the last 4 Mr. Hockey winners from Minnesota, so the best high school player in the state every year, the last 4 are from northern Minnesota. 4 different communities, 4 small towns in northern Minnesota, and those kids are, they're playing other sports. But so that's part of it. But I think the other part is just we've had talks about extending our season. Our season just ended last week. So there's been talk about extending the season later into March, and then we kind of say, well, that's also spring break time. So people are leaving for spring break. They don't want to interfere with their spring break. We also think volunteers, by the time you get to mid-March, are pretty worn out. Like it's been a long year, and it is. It's a long season. Some people might think it's short, but October, November, December, January, February, and part of March, that is a pretty long season, right? I mean, I coached 2 kids this year, and I was ready for the season to be done. I'm ready to sit at the soccer field and just sit in the sun and watch. So that's a little bit of it too, in that, like, the season, good season, let's move on. And and I'm not naive to think like a lot of people aren't getting their kids into spring hockey, which falls outside of our purview, or do summer hockey all year long. Like, don't endorse that, but I know that happens, and I'm not going to say that doesn't. So if people want more hockey, they could certainly get it. It's just not really sanctioned by Minnesota Hockey. Now we do have off-season programs and things like that, but it's not, when you ask me what our season is, I would say our season is October to March, and that's when you play for your association. So we haven't had much discussion about it going longer. We do still promote multi-sport athletes. That's tougher and tougher in these days, but if we started our season in September, that's a whole lot of soccer, football players, fall baseball players, tennis players, golfers that are forced to choose one or the other, and I don't think that is what we want to be doing for youth sports. I think we want kids to do everything, to do every sport and play as much as they can. And, I have my 9-year-old daughter played hockey this year and played basketball. Like, I want to encourage that, even if that's makes me a dinosaur. I think we should make hockey here as accessible to anyone that plays as many sports as possible.
Yeah. Amen. You mentioned, you've got some daughters, Glenn. One area where we talk about the growth of your membership has been, targeted at, the female playing community. What have you done to encourage more girls to play hockey, and what's maybe that hook that gets them involved in the first place?
Again, I think it comes from, there's a lot of ways I could answer this question, but I think the biggest thing comes from inspiration provided by generations before. So the Natalie Darwitzes and the Chrissy Wendells and these Minnesota natives that went to the Olympics, but also were playing high school hockey back when they were here. Like, that inspired a generation, because we were late to the game. I mean, like everywhere, but we did not have much equality when it came to hockey when I was in high school. I mean, there was no girls' high school hockey
really
until 1995.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think in 1995 there might have been, just a handful of teams. Now they're all over the place. They still have a ways to go to catch up in both numbers and amount of teams, but it's been a massively growing piece of our membership is girls hockey players. And again, I don't want to come off as patting ourselves on the back, but when it comes to developing elite women, I mean, we do a good job on the men's side, but the women's side is even crazier. Just the gap between the number of Division I women that we have compared to the next state, it's incredible. And so, and all these girls, like on the boys' side, there's all these entities kind of pulling kids away, trying to pull kids away to this, do this instead of that, do this instead of that. There's less of that on the girls' side. So they are really almost all playing through their senior year of high school. When I look at their bios, and 'cause I'm a nerd and I go through every player's bio to see what their path was, and in their bios on their college hockey pages, like it says like four-year letter winner in 3 sports, played soccer, hockey, and track and field, or tennis, or volleyball. Like, there are so many multi-sport athletes, girls. So again, I'm probably getting off on a tangent, but I just think, like, people have seen that it works. Girls hockey works. There's lots of girls playing, and so it started from those top girls on down, and so I'm just so proud to see what girls hockey has become here. It's just it's really cool. It's really inspiring, and the women that have come out of here always are willing to give back. These Olympians are always willing to give back because they are so passionate about the sport and getting more young girls playing. So it's been really cool, and so we're definitely proud of that. But I can't even say that we've done anything specific that's really spiked our girls' numbers, other than to say, I will say that everywhere, the girls don't get the bad ice times. It's all equal at all associations. The girls have the prime time ice just like the boys' side does, and the girls, whatever level team, the B2 team or the A team, is treated the same, just like on the youth side. So, so I think that equality is just second nature. Where when I was a kid or in high school, that wasn't the case. The girls got the crap ice times. If there was even a girls' team, most of them had to play with boys. They didn't have that option. So, so it's just, we've evolved a lot over the years, and it's been great to see.
Yeah, it's
one quick story.
No.
Sorry, one just kind of anecdote. So this year is our 75th anniversary of Minnesota hockey, and so we were looking at all these old handbooks over the years, and like we saw these advertisements that not even that far back, so probably the 1980s, that said, youth hockey is a great place for your son to develop these character traits.
Yeah.
So it was like not even a mention of girl, like not even like, don't even think about your girl playing hockey, even though there were some girls playing hockey, but like it was for your son. This is a sport for your son, and that is completely changed, which is obviously for the better. So
it's extraordinary. The as you mentioned, well, one, the equity, being able, similar ice times and all that. That's we've seen that too. I mean, that's a huge change, and looking back on it, it's crazy to think how disproportionate it was. Like, so that in itself is nuts. But your comment, and we're hearing this in all aspects of society, really, not just sport, but that ability, as you say, to see someone else, see that generation before you, they influence the next one, and you get to see, we see that whether it's male, female, we see it whether it's people of color, that they see some themselves, participating, right? They see someone like them, looks like them, whatever the case may be, from their community. And I just think that is like, that is just such an influencer, and has such a profound impact. And I'm I hate to say this, but I mean, this has been relatively recent kind of epiphany we're having. Like, of course that makes sense. Of course it makes sense. People would want to see, people like them in doing whatever, right? So, I mean, just that realization, Glenn, I think is just extraordinary. And I think that's going to lead to further growth. The one area I am concerned about in female sport, and I don't know, this is happening in Canada, is that there is a drop off at 14, which we'd seen in I guess more boys hockey a little bit as well. Tends to align with being in high school, jobs, that sort of thing. But concerning in female sport participation. So I know we deal with Respect Group up here. They've got an online module about keeping girls in sport. And so are you seeing that as well. And from what I understand, COVID has even made further impacted that even more negatively, like that what not coming back sort of thing. Are you guys seeing that too?
Well, I'll be honest and say I don't know. And the reason I don't know for sure is because in Minnesota, after you hit 14 or 15 years old, your next progression is high school hockey, which is separate from us. You might not know that the way I talk so lovingly about high school hockey, because it is this amazing thing, but it doesn't fall under Minnesota hockey. It falls under the high school federation in Minnesota. So I don't have those numbers. I could probably ask and find out, but at least because girls' numbers are not as high as on the boys' side, there are fewer teams at high school girls hockey that make cuts. Most kids, there's a place either on the varsity or the junior varsity team. Now, in some of the bigger schools, that's not, Edina, Minnetonka, Wayzata, White Bear Lake, they do cut kids. And so we do have a little bit of struggle of finding enough competition for those girls to keep playing, or those girls that don't want to play high school hockey, but they would like to play hockey in some capacity. So there is a little bit of challenge on that. But whether or not there's a big drop off at that 14 age, I can't answer that with certainty. But my guess would be that most have a place to play within the high school hockey realm.
Glenn, as we wrap here, we kick things off with a hypothetical question, and we'll end one with a hypothetical question. So let's imagine that somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm from a community where there's never been minor hockey before. There's no history of hockey. Like we're starting with an absolute blank canvas. What advice would you give them to say, here's how you run a model association? What would be the keys that you would instruct them to focus on?
Yeah. So if that were the case, first of all, I hope they have access to ice.
There's ice. We just built a new rink. That was also part of it.
Okay, so they got a new rink. Yeah. Then my whole thing would say, you cannot start from the top up. And this is maybe a basic answer, but you have to get as many 5 to 8 year olds in your community as possible, and just bring them to the rink and get them out there. And don't look for, if you're a fledgling organization, don't look for outside competition. Get as many kids as you can and have them play against each other, and divide them up equally, and make sure you're having fun with it. So let's say if you can get 30 kids, you could make 4 teams out of 8, 5 to 8 year olds, and have them play each other and practice together and just have fun with each other, and try to keep that model. So build that base, keep getting those little kids in, and then as those kids grow older, keep them together. And eventually, yes, you can play outside your community and play against other teams. But that would be my thing. Is I feel like in-house hockey is kind of looked down upon.
Yeah.
And, do you guys use that term?
House league.
In-house, where you just play each other.
For sure.
House league is looked down upon a lot.
That's right.
And to me, it should not be. To me, it should be the norm. And so that would be my 2 cents, is if we're starting a program, focus on 5 to 8 year olds and have them play each other, and make it fun and make it easy. Give them the best ice times, give them fun things to do on the ice, and just let them go.
Yeah, it's such a great answer. Such a great answer. And I hate to say, in some, we did an article, and it was called, people, it's not just house league, because people would say, oh, he just plays house league, right? Like, so it took on a negative connotation when it's the foundation. And it should be the foundation of all of our hockey programming. So, I'm so well put, Glenn.
Isn't I think there's communities in Sweden and Finland that are house league up until you're 14 years old.
Yeah.
and those include players that are, you know, in the NHL right now. So it's
they call it, I know when I was in Finland, they called it happy hockey, which I thought was much better than house league. So
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
I like that too.
Yeah. So, hey, Aaron, before we go, Glenn has just reminded me of. So we talked about breezers. So again, I'm taking on part Minnesotan here. So breezers, I knew, but you mentioned Minnetonka, Glenn. So as soon as you said that, I forgot completely about this. When I was a little kid, like under 10, my dad worked for Tonka Toys, and he would go to Minnetonka, Minnesota. So there's my other connection to Minnesota. Tonka Toys.
That's a fun fact of the day.
Fun fact. Really? That's right. So I got breezers and Tonka. So I'm taking part Minnesotan.
Well, can I share one more term with you guys? Well, let me ask you this. What do you guys call a player who never passes the puck?
Puck
hog.
Right. So in my little area that I'm from, of Duluth, Minnesota, if you talk to anyone from Duluth, Minnesota, and you say that player never passes a puck, they'd say, yeah, he's a hongo. Hongo. So like, yeah, that kid's a hongo. He never passes the puck. So that's a term. But if you go anywhere outside the greater Duluth, Minnesota area, no one uses that term. But if you talk to anyone else from Duluth, and Mike Snee would be one of them, if you say he never passes the puck, you say, well, that is because he's a hongo. And then there's a game called hongo if you play, all for all, where everyone, you got 5 kids on the ice and 1 goalie and everyone's trying to score. That game in Duluth is called hongo. So more term I'll share. I
love it. I will put that into
maybe it'll catch on, but
I feel like we're going to need a glossary for this episode for all the different terminology so people can follow along and don't get lost.
I will put that into use immediately.
I would also say that I know that for good reason that Toronto is considered the center of the hockey universe. I think that we should give some consideration to Duluth, Minnesota being the center of the hockey universe, because you look at not just the players that have come out of there, but the people like yourself, Glenn, Mike Snee, Mike McMillan, Scott, like all these people from that region that have come out and have such an influence over the game today. It's remarkable that they all have an origin in Duluth, Minnesota. So my shout out to Duluth, Minnesota. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us. I think getting you and Ian together, the more we can do that, I think there's so much good that, we talk about stealing ideas, that so many people involved with grassroots hockey can listen to these. They can steal ideas. It is awesome. And thanks so much again for joining us today.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day. I love talking with you guys about it. It's just awesome conversation. I really appreciate you having me on.